Daryl Lennington here from itnewsafrica.com, and I'm joined by Deon Geyser, who's the head of the market unit for Nokia for the Southern Africa region. Nice to have you here.
Thank you. Nice joining your show.
So tell us a little bit about Nokia. When did the company start and what is it doing at the present moment?
So Nokia is actually 152 years old. I think many people remember Nokia for the Nokia devices. That was huge back in the 90s, start of the 2000s. Yeah. But today at Nokia, we are a tech company that focuses on creating the technology that connects the world. So today, if you make a phone call from one party to the other, it's very likely that somewhere in between our technology is being used for that specific phone call. Today, if you look at it, we are very much a company which focuses on mobile infrastructure and fixed infrastructure technologies for mobile fixed line operators. And we're of course using that technology also to sell that off to other business domains which need the technology, for example, enterprises, public sector, utilities, etc., etc., etc.
So tell us a little bit about your position in the company. What exactly did you do to get to the position that you're in?
So let me first start that question by, so what do I do? So I head up a market unit which is called Southern Africa, which is pretty much our SADC countries plus Tanzania. I also head up two of our larger group accounts within Nokia for Nokia in Middle Eastern Africa. That also, of course, is the business responsibility, but also, for example, MD of the local board, etc., etc. If you ask the question, so how did I get here? I guess that's an interesting journey, right? I was lucky enough back in the time when I started studying to actually get a bursary from Siemens Telecommunications at the time, late 90s. At that time, after finishing my engineering as well as my IT degrees, I did a degree in engineering management. And I got an opportunity to join Siemens Telecommunications, start of the 2000s. And at that time, Siemens Telecommunications was quite a large and probably not, if not the largest player in Africa in terms of building out mobile infrastructure and fixed line infrastructure in the country. You know, we got involved with the startup of Telco. We got involved with the startup with Vodacom back in 93, 94. We got the contract for rolling out Cell C, start of the 2000s. And so the journey started. So I was very lucky to actually get into an engineering role at the start of that phase. Then moving up the ladder, got into a sales and business management responsibilities. I then had a chance to move to East Africa in 2008. I lived in Tanzania for a period of 6 years and had the opportunity to run our business in Tanzania. And we got involved in a number of very interesting projects, you know, from outsourcing, convergent charging, from A to Z. And to be honest, you know, if you sometimes get a chance to go outside of the borders of the country and someone drops you there and say, hey, you've got responsibility to manage something, you're by yourself, you have to manage it. And to be honest, it was a fantastic learning curve. So later on in 2014, I got asked to join the company again. I left for a brief stint of 2 years. I was asked to become Chief Operating Officer for Tigo in Tanzania. And then in mid-2014, the current management asked me to come back to South Africa. They were looking for a South African person with the capability and caliber to run this business. And I thought, well, it's a great opportunity. You know, someone is going to take it. So I took the opportunity, and it's been a great experience the last 4 years in this role.
So over the past 4 years, what has been your biggest highlight so far of your career?
In the past 4 years, I think we've had several highlights, right? And if I can mention a couple, you know, I think one of the key recent highlights for us has been, you know, with the worldwide 5G momentum starting out, you know, we took a decision that we wanted to be one of the first guys to also launch 5G in South Africa. If you look back at history, we were the first guys to launch 2G. We were the first guys at that time with Vodacom, 3G with Vodacom, 4G with Vodacom. We built the first prepaid systems back in the 90s with them as well. And we took a decision that we really wanted to be sure that we also do the first 5G. So we started a program mid of last year. We brought the first 5G demo kits to South Africa in November of last year at AfricaCom. We started a program of looking at what they have to do and what we need to do in order to build out the technology. And this last year, we've had various 5G initiatives that has been running. And now, if you look at AfricaCom coming up in the next 2 weeks, you know, the first 5G live sites will be there, this time with Rain, because they're the only guys that's got the 3.5 spectrum licensed. So we will be doing, a first off with them, and it's actually nice to be part of these technology leaps because they're only coming along once in 10 years, right?
Yeah.
I think a couple of other key highlights for me is, in 2016 we put together Nokia and Alcatel-Lucent globally, and of course also in South Africa. Now, what does that do for us as a company? That means that Nokia today, we're the only tech company that has an end-to-end portfolio and that can play worldwide. We're the only one, right? Ericsson, one of our main other competitors, they cannot play end-to-end. They have to do that through partnerships. They don't have their own technology, which they build and invest into R&D in. And the other competitors are two Chinese competitors which can play end-to-end. They're not allowed to play in North America. Now, that is a big issue. Why is that a big issue? Because that gives access to a number of the international OTTs, which we know in South Africa, for example, Facebook, Google, and the likes. And if you look at some of the technology momentum, the real first 5G rollouts are starting in the US this year. We recently signed a $3.5 billion contract with T-Mobile in the US, which is a big contract, and you will soon see that all the other operators is also selecting us as a 5G partner, which means that from a portfolio side, we can do everything end-to-end and do that worldwide. We also, of course, back in China, we're the largest European vendor in China. So that's been an interesting curve, putting the company together in 2016, because that actually gave us scale and capability to do not only what we do very well in mobile at the time as Nokia at the time, but also if you look at putting the Alcatel-Lucent pieces, which is very strong in IP optics, fixed access, and a bunch of software, it puts us as Nokia with very strong capabilities in all the product portfolios in our industry. So that is really, for us, really good to see, because that is increasing our engagements with the large operators as well as the smaller guys, And not only that, also with government, right? We're having very interesting dialogues with governments around public Wi-Fi, around how do we connect schools, around how do we connect cities, this whole concept of smart city development. And a lot of our software capabilities, complements what we do in the connecting technologies, whether we connect a school or a public building through Wi-Fi or through a microwave or through a fiber link. The key thing is how do we add IoT and other services on top of that to actually implement this whole concept of smart cities. So we're involved in a number of those projects as well. So it's really nice to see, not only with the service provider piece and the latest and greatest technologies, and we signing up a number of large deals, which is actually increasing our market share, but also in the other enterprise pieces, it is really gaining traction. So and to be honest, I'm quite happy with the progress of what we're making.
So tell me about Nokia's highlights for 2018. What's the company's biggest highlights for this year?
So I'll take a couple of global, and then I'll bring it local. And the reason why global, because our industry is such that the global trends impact us locally. And as I mentioned, I think some of the key highlights this year for us is that we've just brought out, the first 5G sites is rolling off the factory lines, going into the US and several other markets. So that is really a big highlight for us as a company. It is big because it is driving, the future spend, and it means that, the technology that our customers buy from us is actually the technology that is ready for the future as well. So that is very important for us. Locally, as I mentioned to you, I think the highlight for us in the last year is the fact that, we've made good progress around what we defined actually 2 years ago as this path to 5G, if I can call it that. Because 5G, many people look at it as a radio technology, but actually what 5G does is, and that's why the last 2 years have been more talking about the path to 5G, is if you look at it, that if you want to deliver 10 gigabits per second at a base station site, you need to be able to carry that traffic to the base station as well, and your infrastructure behind that needs to be able to deal with that. So we've been involved in a number of projects which is moving core systems to virtualized systems. We have been deploying some of our latest IP and optics portfolio for some of our larger customers, which allows their networks to carry the latency and the capacity they need once the 5G spectrum, for example, in South Africa becomes available. You probably follow the current white paper discussion in South Africa. The real 5G spectrum for some of the operators will only become available for auction in 2020. So it's important that as the spectrum becomes available, that the operators really look at what do they do in the backhaul and other pieces, that once that spectrum becomes available, that you can actually just switch on 5G. So that's why we've been talking about this path to 5G as an umbrella strategy. And we have been working with various operators across Africa with defining that strategy for them. What does it mean for them? What do they need to do in every element of their business in order to prepare themselves that they are actually not reinvesting, but actually the money they invest today is ready for that.
All right. So you mentioned the path to 5G. What is Nokia planning for 2019 and 2020 when it comes to other aspects of the business?
Okay. So I think our strategy is quite clear, and if I follow sort of the global strategy that Nokia has from a key strategic pillars, which Rajiv even talks about to our shareholders, is number one, we want to lead in our service provider businesses, right? And that means, as Nokia, we actually are working directly with all the service providers in the world and also in Africa. And for us, one of the key pillars is to actually increase our share and cross-sell some of the portfolio elements some of the operators don't have from us. Take, for example, one operator may have a lot of our IP, and we're looking at increasing that to also do radio and other pieces with that. Or, for example, if there's greenfield startups where with all these license and spectrum opportunities coming out in Africa at the moment, there are new startups coming in, is to make sure that we grab those opportunities at the spectrum topics open up. Take, for example, the WOAN in South Africa, right? Someone has to build that. So those are opportunities for us. The third element is around what do we do in enterprise? So the last year and a half, we have been revamping what we do in the enterprise, and I would say public sector enterprise, utilities, extra large organizations. What is our go-to-market strategy? What do we actually do in that space? Because traditionally, as Alcatel-Lucent and formerly as Nokia, separate entities had their own strategy, and we sort of aligned that with our partnerships to make sure we are pushing the right product to the right channel. And that is starting to bear fruit, and we're hoping really that that business in 2019, 2020 will actually, on top of what we do with the big service provider growth, is also looking at growing that business for us. We for example, see one of the big opportunities in Africa is private networks, whether that be mining. I mentioned already, for example, the public Wi-Fi scenarios where operators are looking at deploying public Wi-Fi instead of, for example, an LTE network. So those are, I would say, the four key elements. Our global partnerships, and many people may ask, so what does Nokia do today when it comes to devices? Of course, the devices piece we run through a partnership with HMD. So HMD has got the brand license with Nokia for 10 years to manage, build, operate, and sell the devices business. So we work closely with them in the market. But that is more global partnership that we have versus a local partnership. In the local market, we really focus on what do we do with our service provider business, our enterprise business, and also then from a public sector perspective.
All right. So with technology rapidly moving forward, how is it changing the face of traditional business?
Good question. I think the technology piece becomes an enabler, right? And there are many buzzwords that people use in our industry, but which is becoming reality. And I'll talk briefly about two of them. The one is, if I talk about automation. If you look at the enabling of automation, for example, some of the technology we provide, if you are able to get good data at the right speed, at the right latency, to whether that be a manufacturing line, whether that be to any form of business, you are able to automate decision making, and you're able to automate business processes quicker. Now, if I take, for example, the current government of South Africa is trying to drive a big drive around manufacturing. Those manufacturing plants need to look at how do they automate as much as possible. Yes, there's a big drive around labor force creation, but how do we actually utilize automation in everything that we do to make it more streamlined and more accurate? It's not only about the cost savings, but how do you do it actually more accurate, that you can push more volumes out more accurately? The second thing is around, we may call it AI, but I would, for our sake, not only call it AI, I would almost call it insight. If you are able, with the data that you have, with linking that, for example, perhaps with an IoT capability, right? If you're able, as a business, to see all your assets out in the market, know in real time where they're at, what they are doing, if you can take that back and put some intelligence on top of that, it will fast track your decision making. And that is why, if you look at, for example, what we as Nokia is doing, all our technology that we built And what we do use in-house is actually focused on automation and using AI and intelligence in order to actually, streamline our businesses. I think the third thing, very much so, is also, as I mentioned briefly, is IoT. Right, IoT is changing the landscape. Right, if you have millions of devices out there, think about a pipeline construction, right? If you are able to monitor and sense exactly what's happening on the pipeline, to manage, leakages, take sewage systems, right? I mean, take our water systems in South Africa. It's one of the biggest problems that we have. If you are able to actually provide intelligence through sensors and automate decision making on top of that, you will save billions in this country, right? And I think that is where technology can actually not only help businesses but also the environment for us.
So some fantastic insight there. So what trends do you see impacting business and consumers in 2019?
I think business is the three ones I mentioned: automation, AI, which these are big buzzwords, but there are companies locally which are starting to embrace that. And the third one is IoT. And there are companies that is really starting to embrace that and utilize those technologies. And the ones that leapfrog their current systems in order to actually go down the track of looking at technology as an enabler, they are the people that will actually survive the long run, we believe. From a consumer perspective, I think it's an interesting trend to watch what's happening with the big OTTs. And why I mention that, a lot of our traffic with OTTs, whether that be Netflix, Facebook, WhatsApp, Twitter, whatever the case may be, a lot of the traffic runs over our current operator networks, but is actually managed by these OTT players. And a lot of the regulations, privacy type of issues, security type of issues, which is global threats to these guys, will impact also us. And that's why, I think, we sometimes tend to forget that we're living in a global world. And these trends and impacts and security risks, take, for example, if you have a hacking problem, take it maybe coming out of a country which is not your own, right? And what are those security, privacy type of issues that is coming from that? There's a big discussion happening in Europe, UK, etc., and the US around these. And I honestly believe that more of that we will start to see, from our side. We just had some of the big hacks happening in South Africa more recently, and I think security is the second big one, which I don't really think people realize how much data people actually share on their devices publicly.
Yeah.
And what is the implication of that. And if you are able to actually get access to that information, what can you do with it? So outside of all the government initiatives around connectivity, driving prices down, data must fall, etc., that is a big issue, of course. But I think there's been a lot said about that. I think the big thing, really is the other piece, which is privacy and security.
All right, to finalize the interview, what advice would you give to individuals rising up the corporate ladder?
Good question. I mean, I'll share with you my own. I think what worked for me in my career is, when I had the opportunity to go to school and study, I tried to make the most out of it. I was lucky enough, I did 3 degrees. I was lucky I did quite well at school, but that, it didn't come without hard work, right? So I think that's a first. You have to give yourself a solid foundation. When you want to start out, is get yourself the right degrees and work really hard at that. That's point one. I think point two is when you do get an opportunity to jump into a job is, while you're working at it, is try and learn as much as possible. I remember starting out, within my first 5 years, I moved around actually quite a bit. I had 3-4 career moves in my first 5 to 10 years. And the reason was I really wanted to learn how this business is being put together and how to understand that, and how does the various pieces fit together. And if I had an opportunity to take more on, I would actually do that, even if it meant working a little bit harder. And then I think one thing that really I do believe in is the fact of, don't be scared to look at international exposure and international assignments. We are looking today at a global world, right? And a lot of the people that we recruit or even recruiting at is people that either has got some form of international exposure or has gone internationally, because it gives you a broader worldview, right? I mean, I take our business, we're a multinational company, and many of the companies we work with today are multinationals, and you need to know how to deal with other cultures, other religions, other legal systems, and it does provide a broader sense of how you need to manage your business if you've seen things happening in another part of the world, which gives you a fresh perspective on how you need to treat your current situation. And I think lastly is, network of people, I think, is really important. Make sure you build a strong network in the industry that you're in, inside and outside of that. And lastly, I think one thing which I really try to do is to have, outside of working hard, is to have a fairly balanced life, right? I'm one that believes in having, I've got 3 kids, I've got a beautiful wife. I try to make sure that outside of working really hard, that I spend enough time with them to make sure that I can balance my own family as well, and have a balanced life in terms of being healthy, being fit, and being able to manage the other pieces. Because if I can do all of those well, I sort of feel that, one is a well-rounded individual. So.
Right, so some great insights and great advice from Deon there, as well as a little bit of information regarding what Nokia is planning in 2019 and 2020. It's been an absolute pleasure having you here today. Thank you very much for your time.
Appreciate it. Thank you.